Oh, there we go.
There we go. Good evening, everybody. Thank you to those of you who have joined us on this beautiful evening. I am Constance Perenni and am delighted tonight to introduce our Deputy Mayor. This is Laura Morg, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experiences that drew her to this work. And then you'll get to hear from Nathan Daum, and just prepare to learn lots this evening.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
And thank you everyone for coming tonight to listen to this topic. It's a very important topic to all of us. And I really appreciate Nathan Daum talking about it. And just a little bit about me. I'm a fourth generation Washingtonian, but when I was little, I moved around, and I happened to be living in Ohio next to the Cuyahoga River when it caught fire when I was in fourth grade. And that was very inspirational to me. I couldn't imagine how the adults thought this was okay. It had caught fire before, 2 or 3 times. Nobody got all that excited before. Why get excited now? And as a child, I felt this was wrong. So I said to myself, I'm going to do something about that when I grow up. So fast forward from there, I went to the University of Washington. I'm a chemical engineer, and I wanted to do pollution prevention and energy conservation. And my first job was at a steel mill, which no longer exists there in West Seattle. Now it's a different name. I should put it differently. Now it's a different name. And I did both. And the first year was when the hazardous waste regulations were really coming out. So I got to do all of that stuff. And I was busy telling people, don't do this, don't do that. You need to do this. No. And on the other side, I was doing energy conservation, and I saved them $2 million my first year. And they said, that's all right. We like that. And I said to myself, there's one side that's a whole lot easier. So I have spent, while I've done both my entire career, and I've worked in various industries. I've worked in steel and pharmaceutical and biotech, aviation, electronic manufacturing. Now I'm a facilities manager, not a facilities manager, a facilities project manager at an office based environment. But it's all of the time I'm looking at pollution and energy conservation. And climate change is right here. So for me, that is a really big topic. But another really big topic is economic development. I've only worked for private industry. I can see the difference of when you have an atmosphere that allows businesses to thrive, and you draw them versus ones that don't. And I'm really interested in listening to what Nate has to say. And I'm really interested in what kinds of things that we can do to draw the kind of businesses that we want to have at Shoreline. And it's a topic that it's something I really think we need public input on. Nate has so many tools in his toolbox, but there may be others that we're willing to allow him to use, and just trying to think it through on what makes a difference. There is a restaurant owner in Seattle who has expressed interest, for instance, in setting up a restaurant here. But the developers, that a restaurant, commercial kitchen costs $150,000 just for the kitchen, not for the building, not for all the other stuff, just for the kitchen. And the developers aren't interested in putting that kind of money in. And the restaurateur may not have enough money just to make it happen. So, how do we get there? I think Nate's going to talk about that, but you may have ideas on things that we can do to encourage business coming. Innovation areas where it's low cost rent is another way that some cities and counties have done. No idea if Shoreline's considered that. And if so, what Nate thinks. So I'm really interested in listening to what you have to say. And at that, I'm turning it over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think just to start, I want to thank the deputy mayor for that wonderful introduction. And for making sure that 0 rivers have caught fire in Shoreline during her tenure as deputy mayor. So we're on a good streak of number of days since our last river caught fire. Let's keep it going. And I hope I can live up to that great introduction. It's a pleasure to be the economic development manager for the city of Shoreline. So I report to the city manager and work in the city manager's office. I have a number of years of experience in planning and communications and small business support, and real estate work, and it all comes together in this job. And for the first time ever makes me look a little less crazy and scattered to my wife, because it all is one job. And I'm very fortunate to get to do this work on behalf of the community and the city council. Let's see here. I was very confident that I had this Zoom and sharing. There it is. I'll figure it out. There we go. All right. Obviously, this is May. Sorry, it says it is April. So a lot of these slides, a lot of what you're going to see is information that I package up and share with developers and businesses and folks looking to invest in our community or interested in some cases, I corner them at a conference right after they come off the stage and try to talk them into seeing my slideshow about all the great things we have going for us here in Shoreline and why they should be a part of the great things that are happening here. But a lot of this information is obviously very useful to all of us who care, live, work, and care about this community. So our economic development work that we do in Shoreline, by the way, I'm an office of one, and the reason there's only one of me is because economic development is everybody's job. And so it's it wouldn't be a job in a city that didn't care about this issue and think and work hard to make sure that the work that we do is helping to grow our economy every day while we do our work. And so I get to work with everybody in the city. I'm probably the one person who gets to work with more people throughout the city than maybe anybody else in the city. And I really enjoy that work. And our work comes from our comprehensive plan, which is undergoing our update right now, a major update that we do every 10 years. And then we take that and break it down into 5-year chunks. So the economic development strategic plan that we're operating from is the second of 5-year plans that were set in motion following the previous comp plan update. And then the annual council goals are updated obviously every year, as the name implies. So I'm not going to read all of this, but you can just see, the comprehensive plan and the economic development element. Some of the things that we really cared about in 2012, I think are still very important. We still hear a lot about quality of life, retail, office, job creation. Again, I promised I wouldn't read everything on the screen, so I will skip ahead to encouraging multi-story buildings for efficient land use. That's just one of the things that I like to highlight that shows where we were in 2012. We were just very eager to see some development that was more than 1 story in height, right? We had houses over here and shopping centers or businesses with parking lots, and we wanted somebody to combine housing and business, right, into one building, or even just multi-story buildings, as it says here. Fast forward to now here in 2024, we're very interested in what those multi-story buildings have going on inside, right? And there's been a lot of discussion about that. And that's been a big part of the comprehensive plan update process. And I know that we'll continue to hear more about that as we refine that plan and develop our strategic plan for the next 5 years. So the current economic development strategic plan really has some big major priorities, and you're going to see that a lot of our focus has been on real estate development. So the private sector developing land that fulfills the potential that we have in pretty ambitious zoning in the city, pretty widespread zoning for big buildings, and for good reason. Shoreline Signature Boulevard, we invested $140 million to upgrade Aurora and to be more like our main street, our town center, our living room for our community that obviously cities to the north and south of us seem to take a different approach. Well, maybe they're catching up to us and they're taking the same approach now, but that's led to hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And Shoreline Place is a great example of that, where $400 million of investment just in that, just in a quarter of that community renewal area is underway as we speak. So you start to see the scale of why such a big focus on real estate development and investment in the land and realizing the potential of our zoning. The Fircrest surplus property, it's not technically surplus, so that's one phrase that's getting updated, and but in the previous plan, we called it surplus. But there is a movement underway for that land to be put into more active use, the underutilized portions of the campus. But hasn't quite happened yet. And then, of course, igniting station area growth, which is really just starting to get underway as we see that transformation. And with light rail opening later this year, the development will just even further accelerate. And then there are some other things we do as well, focusing on commercial nodes and the growth and development in our neighborhood commercial centers. And then there are non-geographic placemaking projects, which you probably can't see that on the screen, but then there are these different clusters and areas of focus and opportunity, which I will get to talk a little bit more about later. Once again, lots of text here. This is just to show you the council has annual goals. But what's important to see here is just goal number one is strengthen Shoreline's economic climate and opportunity. So this just again shows you why we care so much about economic development. And there's a number of action steps in there that speak to redevelopment in the light rail station areas, the Shoreline Place community renewal area, things along those lines. So tonight I'm going to share a few highlights of some of the activities that we're seeing and some of the ways that all this planning is bearing fruit. And you'll see a lot of pictures of things that you're seeing happening in the real world, but hopefully a little bit of that context of why this is all happening now today in 2024 and how far back it goes and how many years it has taken maybe for some of these things to come to fruition. So we'll look at the station areas a little bit more up close. We'll look at some of that development up and down Aurora. We'll look at the Shoreline Place community renewal area. And then we'll talk about some other things that are not so geographic or real estate development focused, such as small business outreach and some of the work that we've done, really, especially beginning during the pandemic, to help small business recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic. We'll look at some of the creative economy initiatives that we have going on, and so we'll look at some of the performance indicators that we track and share with council for their annual workshop and planning purposes. And then we'll look ahead. And as we think about the comprehensive plan update process that's going on right now, what are some of those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And what do we see looking ahead for Shoreline? But first, let's look at what's happening today. I like using this graphic from 2016, I think it was, an image of what the light rail station areas could look like. And now we will get to see some renderings that real developers made. This is a city document, creating these kind of make-believe buildings that might show what the development capacity might look like. But now we're seeing, and even more so now, real buildings as the siding is starting to go up on some of those buildings in the station areas. And you all are aware of some of the major initiatives that are going on in the city, and in this case, outside of the city limits, in fact. And again, a lot of my presentation is geared towards outside audiences, but I really like to brag about the fact that we care so much about the infrastructure and the growth and development in our community that we took the lead on this right of way, which is not even inside the city limits, which is 145th. Of course, I think we probably all know that, but it's something that is pretty surprising to the outside community that our city limits end at the back of the sidewalk. And then this roadway that already has been a challenging stop and go traffic condition will just get worse with light rail opening this year. And so we took it upon ourselves to redesign it and do the fundraising and begin the work, which is underway now and will be a dramatic improvement and really enable that light rail station to be successful at 148th Street. And we're seeing a lot of development in that station area. This is just a high level look at the potential and some of the projects that are happening there. The light green or the teal color is the MUR 70 zone. So that's our highest intensity of development. It has the highest building height and highest kind of capacity for units in terms of new housing or other uses that could go in there. And what you can kind of see here is that there's a few projects and they're big, and there are 4,000 plus units going in that are in among the projects that we are aware of. But you can still see there's still quite a lot of capacity, and there's still quite a lot of unclaimed parcels, at least that I don't know about yet. And a lot of this just comes through word of mouth and tracking what's going on in permitting and pre-applications and things like that. But it's a good sample of some of the things that are happening. So we'll zoom in on a couple of these key areas where some of that activity is going on. And then this is at the 185th station. This is not as much, about half as many units in the pipeline there, so 2,000 new units, but several pretty big projects happening right near the station. And I'm sorry, and I should have mentioned, the city is also putting its money where its mouth is, right? And so we're investing in parkland in these neighborhoods. And a lot of that is thanks to the development community. So with each of these 4,000 new multifamily units, we'll get about $3,000 per unit in park impact fees. And we've been able to be very strategic and opportunistic when opportunities arise, to make sure that we're building out our parkland to keep pace with growth. So the park impact fees the whole idea is the growth pays for growth, and we've been able to be successful with some of that. So the Paramount Open Space Park expansion that we completed in 2020 and 2021. We've started to chip away at the southern edge of the Twin Ponds Park. That may take a generation or more, but as opportunities come up, we try to make sure that we are adding to the parkland in these really dense mixed income neighborhoods that we're seeing take shape. So in the 185th station area, as I said, not as many units in the pipeline as of today, but you can see the Shoreline School District there, the Shoreline Center. That's a 28-acre single parcel. That's just that in and of itself represents a tremendous amount of capacity for development. Again, no plans as of today for anything new anytime soon there. And then, lots of capacity within the zoning around in the rest of the neighborhood as well. So as I said, you get to see pictures of not just government created images, but these are real projects. And so this one is the Line. So 235 units, multifamily building. It's now fully topped out. They're actually finishing out the interiors now and getting the siding, the cladding up on the outside of the building. This is a great example of a building that started to take shape and sort of stress tested the code, and we discovered some things that we maybe needed to do. And fortunately for us, the developer was able to hang in there along with us as we changed the code on them between one pre-app and the next. Between the first coming to the counter the first time and the second time, we added a provision in the code that a building that is over 200 feet from the nearest right of way, where it touches two different parallel rights of way, but any point of it is more than 200 feet from a perpendicular roadway, needs to put in this dotted line here. So this mid-block connection will now create a new access through the neighborhood for people on bikes or pedestrians. They also opted to include ground floor commercial space at a time when it was not required. But that's another example of how the city has just continued to evolve and be nimble. We've recognized a lot of multifamily buildings were coming in, and we weren't seeing as much of the retail space that we know we need to support that growing population. And so our council adopted new regulations that'll require ground floor commercial and more of the multifamily, especially in the commercial sections of the city. But this is one that opted to include it. So they're building that out on 145th. And then, as I said, that mid-block connection that'll connect between 145th and 147th. And then hopefully through future development, all the way to the 148th Street non-motorized bridge. There's another project just next door to that one, 550 units. You'll also see in parentheses the number of affordable units. These are through a combination of the mandatory affordability in the light rail station areas, which go for 99 years, that a percentage of the building is required to remain affordable to folks making 75 or 70% of area median income for studio and one-bedroom apartments, or 80% for 2 bedrooms or larger. As another project in that neighborhood, you can also see they have topped out and reached full height and have started adding the cladding on the outside, and that we expect will be opening up for their first tenants to move in this year. This is another example of the city being nimble and responsive in real time, but unfortunately a victim of a lack of information, and this project has not yet begun. So the story here was that the building is right next to the 148th Street station and right next to the 148th Street non-motorized bridge, right in the central transit-oriented community that we're trying to create there. They came along and designed a building that they wanted to be transit-oriented development, and found our code requires them to treat the property line between them and the station just as they would with any other property line, and not like a street. And so they were required to have a 6 foot, like a cedar fence, and landscaping and buffer to really separate them between them and their neighbors. And they asked us if that's really our vision. And well, we would like, of course, no, it is not. And we were able to get a change through so that a transit station like that is treated just like it is, just like any other street would be. They were able to negotiate a no-build easement and access across the station sidewalk, basically, that runs along the side of the building with Sound Transit, and able to get that change through our code and design a building that really reflected what we'd like to see there. There's another one where they were opting to include ground floor commercial, even though at the time that wasn't required. It would now be required, but they were opting and prepared to move full speed ahead on developing the project. Unfortunately, when they went to construct, they began to do their excavations and they hit water, a much higher water table than what they had designed for, because unfortunately Sound Transit was dewatering, so pumping water out of the site because they were in the middle of construction at the time that the developer did their soil testing. So that was in 2020 or 2021, and it was a really bad time to redesign and reprice the project because construction costs obviously became reached, and financing costs both have reached all-time highs and kind of just keep going up. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to see that project come out of the ground yet, but it is still on the boards and is still planned to move forward. This is just north of that first project I showed you, and you can see the dotted line in the bottom corner. The same developer that built the project that is spanning 145th to 147th is planning on building this project across the street on 147th. And while they don't control those church properties to the north of them, they do intend to continue that mid-block connection to continue through. They intend to include ground floor commercial. That would now be required in this zone through the new code that council adopted recently. But again, this was planned at a time when that was not required. And this is a developer who just really sees the value of these mixed use communities and has sometimes some choice words for some of their peers who would like to avoid including commercial space if they didn't have to. And then I'm gonna start moving a little more quickly through here. There are a lot of slides. I have a lot of pictures of a lot of projects. And right now, a lot of them are on hold. So this is the project that received its permit approvals. I should update this slide. The permit actually is approved for this project, but they have not moved forward with the increasing costs for construction and financing. Just like homeowners aren't moving because they have an interest rate below 3%. I think 80-some% of people have an interest rate of 4% or lower, and just in Washington state alone. and that's obviously slowing down any kind of change in the housing market. It also, those kind of interest rates are obviously putting a lot of multifamily projects on hold as well. So there's a lot of construction happening out there that we're all very well aware of it, but there hasn't been anything new that started really in the last 6 months. So, about 2 years from now, we will see this very tight housing market, although it is very tight now. There's some excess supply of multifamily product on the market today. A lot of that is concentrated in downtown Seattle. But what we will see is around 2 years from now, when a bunch of projects would normally be opening that didn't get started around now, with continued population growth, projects like this being on hold are not going to be helping when it comes to the housing crisis. So it's just an interesting conundrum. Developers are very bullish. They believe that the market will support the new housing, but it's not their money. So developers work with other people's money, and the other people don't want to give up the money for any kind of real estate while they have so many huge office buildings that are coming due for refinancing, and they are vacant or largely vacant and can't be converted to housing because they were built in the 60s and they're 10,000 square foot floor plates or whatever. So there's a lot of real estate issues in the financing world that get in the way of financing housing. So another project that is ready to go, should financing become available to underwrite it. This is the project a little bit early on in the design phase before it kind of got put on hold in that same area. This is a project that is much closer to moving forward. So this is 115 units. And so we're starting to see maybe projects of that scale or lower. In fact, I think this project has received their permits and has begun construction. And this developer also built the one parcel 35 unit project right across the street to the north from here. And they are going to continue doing more of that size. It's a bit more bite size, and they can find financing from local high net worth individuals or things like that for these projects to kind of move forward. And interestingly, their first of those smaller projects is in for permitting right now, and is subject to those new ground floor commercial regulations. It's a very small building. I think maybe 30 or 40 units, but it does include a small commercial space at the front of the building that just perfectly meets the requirements of this new code. It's a 900 square foot commercial space. And so it'll be really interesting to see how the neighborhood starts to come together with these new requirements. I don't have a slide for that one. It's a little too new. As I mentioned before, we've been able to add parkland and try to keep pace with the growth in that area. Whoops. And then, so now kind of zooming in on the 185th station area, and we'll take a look at some of the projects there. This is one where maybe I should use a real photo because it's real now. You can see this one on the along the freeway in the 185th station area anytime you go through there. It's really coming together, and they should be leasing up this year by the end of the year. And there it is. I lost my cursor for a minute. And this is another example of the city investing in the area. So this Rotary Park conceptual illustration doesn't come from the Parks Department or the Parks Plan. It actually came from the 185th Multimodal Corridor Strategy. And so it's just an idea or a concept from our previous senior transportation planner. But it just shows you kind of what's possible under the high tension power wires that go diagonally through the block there. We are having really positive ongoing dialogue with Seattle City Light about utilizing that in much the same fashion that we have the interurban trail under the power lines here in Town Center. And so we have a draft interlocal agreement that we're negotiating on that. And we are either talking to or have closed on the rest of the properties that we would need from private property owners in that neighborhood. And not a lot of visible change there with either the tenants that were there or the sellers are still there leasing back most of those homes from the city. But this just shows kind of what's possible there. And then some of the projects adjacent and properties that are for sale in the neighborhood. Notably, this was one of the projects that led to one of the key changes that was implemented in our ground floor commercial code that we updated. This project was designed with a small commercial space right across the street from the light rail station, but the city code at the time would have required parking spaces. Equivalent of half of this coffee shop they planned would actually have to be removed and converted into parking. About equivalent of 3 parking spaces, one double-sized stall for ADA, and then 1 regular stall. So 2 parking spaces, and it would have taken a 1,200 square foot coffee shop and turned it into a 500 square foot coffee shop, 600 square foot. And at the time, they didn't have to do any kind of commercial space at all. And there wasn't any other way through the code to change that. And so they just decided to put in more residential space in the ground floor. But as a result of really being, again, having somebody come with a real project that kind of is stress testing the code with a real proposal, it gave us better insight into, you know, what we have in our requirements. And in our new updated code, the ground floor commercial space doesn't necessarily have to have parking. They may want to choose to have parking, but especially at a coffee shop across the street from the light rail station, we recognize people probably won't be driving there in order to get a cup of coffee, right? And maybe people who live upstairs or, you know, are coming on and off the train. And we'll continue to monitor. We're very hopeful that they can change their plans. One of the challenges for a project like that is, again, it's other people's money, and the Bank of America or Wells Fargo, whoever gave them the money, has a copy of the plan set. And if they do anything different than what it says in the plan set they have, they're in jeopardy of losing their financing. So it's interesting. We've learned along the way just how tightly controlled these projects are by people out of town, you know, who really hold the purse strings. This is a really exciting and pretty large scale project, a full block development. This is one where our mid-block connection requirement came into play and required that they put one of these mid-block connections through the site. And it would line up nicely with that Rotary Park. They also opted to put in a second one. So they took this full block development of over 800 units, nearly 900 units, and they actually broke it up into 3 separate buildings and opted to include an additional mid-block connection through the site, principally so that they don't have buildings that are so large that in their first round of lease up, you know, they have new people coming to lease vacant units at the same time that the people who first moved in a year ago are coming up for renewal and competing with the building. So they try to reduce it into a size that's likely to lease up within a year of, you know, around 300 units or fewer. And that made it work out to have in my opinion, just a much better built environment kind of footprint, and breaking up this sort of super block into a smaller scale. They also, again, were including commercial space in this proposal. And again, this was at a time when that was not required in the code. And that was another place where requiring the commercial and with the included parking requirement that we had on the books at the time would have just killed the project. So this is another place where we heard very clearly from the developers trying to create this mixed use walkable environment, and how our parking requirements were maybe colliding with our mixed use dreams. Patty, did I hear you trying to chime in? Did you have something you want to say? All of these are in that MUR 70 zone. And so I think this one is, and I should say if it's 8 stories, which it may be, there's a building height bonus for green building. And I think a lot of these projects are probably over the 70 feet because of getting an additional floor in height for going green, which as soon as the city adopted the green building incentive program, we went just off the charts compared to all of our peer cities, and the number of green buildings we saw constructed in the years following. And so that's probably one of those really meaningful incentives that has been successful for us. Obviously, that project is not underway. We haven't seen that break ground yet. And that's a big project and the financing is really not there right now. This is another one where we are going to continue to need to probably evolve and update the way that we permit these types of projects, because we've just never done anything this big all at once. And it doesn't really work if it's just done all at once, right? So we continue to hear from this developer that there may need to be some tinkering or tweaking in terms of the phasing of how we issue and our permits and things like that. This is another project in that same neighborhood that is ready to go, sort of when financing becomes available.
There's a question online. Any restaurant-ready retail spaces for restaurants and coffee shops at this point? Is anything ready to go?
Nothing that has been completed. Well, I shouldn't say that. So that's a great, that question is well timed, because we will look at a building in this neighborhood here in Town Center, in the Aurora corridor here, and we'll talk about that briefly. And that is this Geo Apartments that you can see here. And then all around this, there are a number of projects that are either under construction or permitted and again, ready to go, should financing become available. So just right around City Hall, where we are kind of in walking distance to where we are right now, nearly 1,200 units are coming potentially if financing is available. And then a bit north of there, so this is north of 185th, and this is showing a few of the projects that are under construction now. The 250 unit project across from the Park and Ride at 192nd, and then the Canopy project, which is 2 phases, one of which is complete and leasing up. And then the potential King County Metro Park and Ride TOD project, which could be approximately 700 units in a mixed use kind of urban village on that major lot. And that's been a council goal over the years to encourage the county to redevelop that as transit oriented development and a transit center.
So is people where
Yes. I didn't get into a ton of detail on that because again, that is one where we've seen plans proposed for that. And as of now, there really isn't financing to make a project like that be able to get underway. This is here further at the southern end of Aurora, down near the border with Seattle. There's this project that was actually moving right along and was near permit approval. And the developer took the unusual step of asking us to stop, not just put it on hold, but to stop. And in fact, if there was anything that they'd been charged for, that they could be refunded because they were not moving forward. And this is a function of the increased cost of construction, the increased cost of financing. It just made it so it was not feasible. And that is the site right behind the ski shop and 258 unit project. Which is interesting. I started asking questions about that site when I first got here about 5 years ago. And the listing agent at the time told me, yeah, developers really like it, but they can't get anything to work in an Excel spreadsheet that Bank of America will believe, even if the land was free. So that's one of those sites where it may take some time before the market really proves that the value is there and that the product, once it's completed, will perform. Interestingly, also in that area, we were able to acquire parkland, 0.4 acre parkland acquired entirely with park impact fees. So again, growth paying for growth, and obviously a lot of growth is happening or is possible in this neighborhood. Our first condo project in over 10 years or something in the city, this Pulte Homes project, is nearing completion now. And then the Shoreline Place Community Renewal Area. And I apologize, my slides are jumping around. There's this is a little preview of it. I think we have more slides that we will look at there, but you can see that project is well underway. Merlone Geyer owns the 17 acres at the center of that 70-acre community renewal area, which we spent over 10 years planning and identifying the mitigations for and designing the public and private, improvements and how that would all work. There are parks and plazas and tree-lined streets, and then there are all the improvements to Westminster and 160th. The development triggers those improvements out in the public realm. And then the development itself is putting in the parks and plazas and tree-lined streets. All of that is on the backs of the future tenants of those spaces, basically. So this is one where the residential component is taking more time to deliver, because they really have a very high level of expectation in order to pay for all these new tree-lined streets and parks and plazas. It needs to be at really the top of the market in terms of the rent, and finding that right partner who agrees with the developer that the market is there, and again, the financing and construction costs are all headwinds that project faces. But we did see the 16,000 square foot phase 1 delivered this year, and the tenants are beginning to finish out those spaces and get those spaces occupied. So this is the slide finally. Sorry, I thought this was coming up earlier than it came up, but this is a 3,000 square foot commercial space just up the road here on Midvale in the Geo Apartments. And this is a great example of a project that was finished in 2020, May of 2020, and here we are in May of 2024. And it's still vacant. Now we have really promising signs that the new owner, so the builder sold it, and the new owner, the building was doing great from a residential standpoint. The only thing they could really improve was the vacant commercial space. So they committed to put in a lot of money to make it appealing to a coffee shop. In fact, so it's a coffee shop that would like to do their coffee roasting on site as well. Unfortunately, this was not built as restaurant ready or sort of that type of food service. So there isn't a built-in fume hood. And so adding that in later is extremely costly. And building out the space, as the deputy mayor pointed out, for that kind of commercial food service is extremely expensive. But this is a case where we have a willing tenant who's looking for a coffee shop in that place, in that location, and the building owner who sees that that's the one place where they can increase the revenue and the performance of the building. And so they're working closely on together to make that happen. But again, that's taken 4 years. And so with commercial space, it's just where with the housing crisis, there are so many people needing a place to live, moving into this area with good paying jobs who can't afford the rent, whether it gets built new or not, right? And so these spaces that are used as residential space are going to get leased up the same time as the rest of the building. Whereas if they're retail or commercial or restaurant, you really need the right tenant who needs that in that location. And there isn't already one across the street from there, right? So it's a much more bespoke sort of a product, and it just takes more time. And this is another project in our town center neighborhood here, just across the street from the GO and built by the same developer. And some of these slides, I have some information about, leasing and performance. Again, this is mostly sometimes for the outside kind of more business audience, but you can just see these are leasing up very, very fast. And I'll just tell you, in grad school, we were told to put in 0% occupancy for year 1, 50% occupancy for year 2, and then it's 95% occupancy for the rest of it, which is kind of full. None of these buildings are 50% vacant in year 2. They're 50% vacant in month 6, and they're 100% occupied by the end of year 1. And we're seeing that in just this 8 months of this project. Life is a little bit of an outdated slide, but it got to 60% leased within 8 months. And we're seeing that's a pretty common pace for these projects. And this, again, the canopy just up the road across the street from Sky Nursery, a quarter of the building leased within 2 months And that's a pretty big building of 300 units. This is the affordable housing project across the street from the light rail, across from the street from the 192nd Park and Ride. This is another one. I could probably update this with a real picture of real building because it's really moving quickly. As I mentioned earlier, the council goals have included encouraging King County Metro to explore redevelopment of the Park and Ride at 192nd as a transit center and transit-oriented development. Really to try to enliven that part of the city and versus the just kind of surface parking lot that it is today. And they have done some preliminary feasibility work on that. I think this is another one that is really going to be dependent upon financing. And we just read today, the Fed announced that they'll continue to hold rates where they are. There was, I think, some expectation the rates were going to come down 3 times over the course of 2024. And now it looks like that'll maybe happen once, maybe in November. And we'll see. Inflation will need to continue to come down before that happens. But that's a project. There's another one. So this is the former police station. This is that project called Evolve that you saw on a previous slide that Patty asked about. And again, I'm sorry for the duplicate slides here, but again, we go back to the Shoreline Place Community Renewal Area. Kind of talked about this before. I didn't mention that ecology moved in over the last couple of years. So WashDOT headquarters kind of doubled in the on paper in the daytime population. But of course, we all know what happened in the last few years also, is a lot of people work from home now. And in our non-office sector, that's been great for our business community because people are home 7 days a week in some cases. And we've seen our businesses really doing well compared to more of those office communities like downtown Seattle. That is just an image of some of the plans that Merlot Geyer has for those future phases of the Shoreline Place redevelopment. And I mentioned that the challenge of getting residential partners on board with their vision and the level of quality and the expense involved. But the project right across the street of the current has been a really successful project that is helping them make that case. And I think once that financing is available, but this is a great example of how fast. This is a 330 unit project and at least up in 12 months. So almost a unit a day. And they were so busy that they couldn't even return the calls from our previous city manager who was looking for a place to live. I don't think she was like, some of you know Debbie, she wouldn't like sort of throw her weight around, but you would think they'd be able to get a call back to Debbie Terry, which was looking for a place to live. They didn't know, yeah, who they're dealing with. This is a neat little project right in that same neck of the woods. This has now been through a couple of different groups and ownership groups that are pursuing this project, a combination of apartments and townhomes and a small retail space right on the street there. And this is right behind the gas station on 155th and just off of Aurora.
We've got a couple questions. Is this a
Okay.
good time for you?
Yeah, it's a good time for me to take a drink of water.
Are buildings, the buildings preparing to be EV ready for the 2030 date? Something you talked about a little earlier.
That's a great question for Jeff Raker. Have you already had him?
We have
No.
not.
So he's our senior transportation planner. I do know that our buildings are required to have EV ready or EV charging. I wouldn't be able to give you the exact specifications of what is exactly required. I think there's some minimum number of every so many stalls need to have a charger installed. And then there's some minimum number that have to have conduit in place where they could easily slip the cables into it and then install those chargers. But I don't know what the exact, I hear so much from developers that we require too much parking. I just sort of feel like we should just say, you don't have to build any parking, but all of it has to be EV. I don't know. That's for our deputy mayor to figure out.
This is also related. are protected bike lanes being planned for these new developments? And I think this probably refers to some of the new access that's being put in and required.
Oh, sure, yeah, so the mid-block connections are bicycle and pedestrian connections, so that's what those are required to be. They're triggering the need for creating new ways, and so the nexus there is that there's this increased density that's anticipated to increase traffic. And so there needs to be new safe ways for people to get around by bike and pedestrian. So yeah, that's more of what those are really for. They're not really economic development initiatives so much as safe, non-motorized connections.
Also a comment that there's very little parking for that commercial space. And I think that was where you were talking about just down the road where the coffee shop will go in, and that parking is often quite a big factor for businesses.
Yes.
Which I know is why the walkability piece is big.
Yeah, so parking is one of those conundrums that we could spend the whole rest of the evening talking about. It's that perfect kind of a problem where no one wants to pay a dime for it, right? And it's incredibly expensive to construct. Constructing parking underground or in a structured parking is $100,000 a stall if you're Sound Transit, or $50,000 a stall if you're just a private developer. And then if you are the shopper of that business or restaurant, you're not gonna wanna go into a garage. You wanna park right out on the street. So if the city isn't putting in on-street parking, but we are requiring ground floor commercial, that's gonna be a problem, right? And so that's one of the things that we've talked about at the staff level and doing the engineering design manual update and making sure that we're thinking about these different parts of the city's code and policies in the same way and at the same time, in the same place. And we are also going to see a different kind of business model and a different kind of environment than what we have today. And so the kinds of places that we have today that are open field parking and commercial buildings set in amid sort of a sea of parking. And then you have multifamily buildings with small commercial spaces on the ground floor that primarily serve people who live upstairs or in other buildings nearby. Very different business models. And so, and we just have to listen to the people who are getting all the money from other people to build all these things, who they wouldn't be able to get that money from them if they didn't know what they were doing and didn't know what they're talking about. And so, and then the other thing I'll say is in cases like Merlone Geyer, they're building twice as much parking as what we require. And then I think there are parking limits, which the planners have to make sure that they're calculating that correctly. So it really varies. But again, if you're serving espresso to transit riders across the street from the station or in the neighborhood, the demand for parking for that particular use may not be as much as, say, Sears. I couldn't get through a meeting with Patty and not mention Sears.
Thank you. Well, also, I mean, just this continues a little bit, but I'm going to ask another question. Will any of these projects have affordable housing for families with children?
That is a great question, and is one that has come up in a number of different meetings that our council has had with the Shoreline School District, with the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, with I think our Shoreline Chamber of Commerce is starting. So there's a lot of interest in how we get at that declining enrollment of our school district and the declining funding that is caused by the declining enrollment, and what incentives and requirements and regulations there are. I was just talking with the mayor outside of this room earlier today when we were both here for a meeting with high school students, and we were talking about that very thing. So it's something we talk about all the time. As of right now, our multifamily property tax exemption isn't dialed in to a great level of detail. So, and specifically it's 70% AMI. So the rent limit is lower for those studio and 1 bedrooms. And then if it's a 2-bedroom or larger, so it's the whole range of anything bigger than a 1-bedroom apartment can be 80% of a area median income. So there's a little bit of flexibility to give the developers, say, well, if you build these little bit bigger units, you can charge a little bit more, but this stops right there at 2 bedrooms. So nobody's building anything more than 2 bedrooms. Not nobody there. You have these like 330 unit projects where there'll be, you know, maybe 10 2 bedrooms and 3 3 bedrooms. I mean, it's a very small number of the building that is, you know, it's 1% of the building is a larger unit. And so there may be some ways that we can maybe require a mix of units or change how we do our incentives to see if we can put our thumb on the scales in some way. And so that was one of the things we asked our council asked the Seattle Chamber of Commerce with their significant policy staff and the research they're doing and the work they're doing around the region to try to encourage cities like Shoreline to create more family size housing. What are the tools or what are the things what are the levers we can pull to influence that? Because there aren't a lot of those, the townhomes the townhomes that we're seeing built all over the city many of those are 3 bedroom. Typically they are. But when it comes to these multifamily buildings, they're not very many of them are, and mostly they're studio or one bedrooms.
And I'm going to frame this goes back to parking, but I'm going to frame it as a question and then we can move on from this issue. But the statement is providing parking will more likely rent commercial space. From what you know, is that the way it works?
It's not that simple. So
Yeah.
it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on who the tenant is, what the product is, the location. But it's incredibly expensive to provide the parking. And so who's going to pay for that is the question, right? And where's it going to go? So, and the other challenge, the project that we showed earlier that really influenced the policy on that, in order to create parking for that coffee shop, it really needs to be right there at that coffee shop. Well, the entrance to the garage for the multifamily building, number one, it's private for the people who live in the building and key card access controlled, and you can't get in there unless you live in the building. And number two, the location of that garage entrance is based on topography, not based on where the coffee shop is. And the whole thing doesn't really work if you try to do both things. So anyway, like I said earlier, parking is something we could talk about all night and make everyone really unhappy. Sure. Yeah. The question was the number of parking spaces required for commercial space is your question? Oh, for apartment buildings. So that depends as well. It gets to be quite complicated, but I believe right now there is a requirement of 0.75 stalls for every studio or 1 bedroom apartment. And then it's, I think it's 1 space or 1.5 spaces for 2 bedroom. There's a whole formula there. And then there are available parking reductions of 25% to 50%, or maybe it's just 25% for proximity to high capacity transit. There are also parking reductions related to affordable housing. There are also parking reductions related to green building. So, and some of these you can stack and some you can't. These are all really good planning questions. But I would say from an economic development standpoint, we want people to shop and spend money here. And if they move here from Ballard and they have a car and the parking is free and plentiful, what are they going to go? They're going to go to Ballard. We don't want them to go to Ballard. We want them to use our transit and walk and shop in the restaurants in their neighborhood. And, parking that appears to be free isn't going to help with that. So it's going to be a challenge. I think, what we're walking into is a completely car-oriented lifestyle. And then we're transitioning to a density and a mixed-use environment that will take quite a long time before it becomes really comfortable to not have cars for everything that we do. So how do we build our community in the meantime? Do we build it in such a way that so that you do continue to use your car to do everything, but it is also incredibly dense? I don't think that's anybody's dream scenario. but we're also gonna have to grapple with the discomfort potentially of this in-between phase. And there are no easy answers to that.
So if we could get Merloin Geyer to hurry up and do that Sears project, thanks for bringing up Sears, Nate. So as a 40-year Shoreline resident, my shopping place takes a car. But I go to several places with one car trip. I go shopping at the Merloin Geyer developed shopping center in Lake Forest Park. I can go to my bank, I can get gas, I can go to the grocery store. Is it working?
But you have to hold it close.
Okay, I can go get gas, the grocery store, the hardware store, I can buy clothes, I can get takeout, I can
Is this
get
an economic
pizza.
development question or a planning
No,
question?
it's both. Because what we're looking at with all the build out and the wait until it happens is people who live here or want to live in a community environment where they can one-stop shop. That's not happening. You've got the coffee shop, the sandwich shop, places that are going into based on what we're requiring for new multifamily development. But we're not getting places that are shoppable where we want to live. The people that live in the apartments need to do something besides just go to the coffee shop on the ground floor. There needs to be more.
Yes.
And I don't know how that happens, whether we create a business center that has all kinds of shops and opportunities to buy, purchase, whatever, and is kind of a one-stop thing. But, yeah, commercial nodes, thank you. Yeah, and how do we get there? To create those?
Yeah.
I mean, the Sears thing eventually will be somewhat of a commercial node, but that's gonna take forever to happen. And in the meantime, you're losing businesses because you're having multifamily housing go in where existing businesses were.
Yes, and so that concern of seeing multifamily housing go in with no ground floor commercial, taking the place of former commercial spaces, is exactly why council chose to give us that charge of have us create new code for them to consider, and ultimately that they did adopt. And one of the things that we recognized in there, to your point, is to be a complete community, you need a variety of services, and a big one is a grocery store. If we want to have a walkable, mixed-use, urban, commercial node at these light rail station, new urban villages, they definitely need grocery stores. And I'm happy to report that one of the developers planning a building in that neighborhood responded to the grocery store incentives that were included in that and changed their plans from no commercial to a grocery store. And I don't have anything to announce specifically about that project, but it's early enough that we are able to influence their design to some degree, so that kind of the way that the trucks would access it would work out really well. But it's an Asian grocer is who they're talking to, and it would be the first grocery store in the Ridgecrest neighborhood of the 148th Street station. And it'd be really great to see the grocery store occupying the complete full ground floor of one of those buildings. And then I think to Bristol's point, mentioning the commercial nodes, one of the things that we're really seeing in the comprehensive plan update process and some of the comments that we're seeing and the interest is for these different neighborhood centers to really get to differentiate from one another. So we have zoning like MB or CB or NB, and each neighborhood business district maybe has a little bit different mix of how much of each of those different kind of types of zoning they have. But it's not really differentiate. NB is NB, no matter where in the city, NB, which is neighborhood business, which also, by the way, can be townhomes. And so that's like one of the things we're running into is like, is it really neighborhood business if the business is the building of townhomes? Like, then maybe not be business. So we're starting to see there's maybe opportunities to differentiate those different nodes. And I think that's something that we're really excited to lean into following the comp plan update is, again, it's not economic development, maybe it's more planning, but it's something that we're really excited about that we see as an opportunity. Yeah.
So I'm moving towards Shoreline from having lived downtown for 20 years. And one thing I've sort of observed, one thing. One thing I've sort of observed downtown is, so Belltown, I lived in Belltown, is retail spaces would stay vacant for years, or a business would move in and last about 3 years, which was probably the length of their lease. And my sense is that when a building gets built, as you've talked a lot about how much finance controls things, it gets built to a pro forma that has a per square foot rent for that retail space that is expensive. And even when that retail space stays vacant, I've seen retail stay vacant for 10 years. The rents don't come down because there's that pro forma. And so that's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about and fantasized that Seattle would like pass a tax on vacant retail space to like make the economics work. So they'd stick a business in there. But yeah, any thoughts about that?
So that's a question that has come up while we were in the process of the ground floor commercial ordinance. And at this point, it was sort of determined to be a bit out of scope for really trying to get the code just right so that we have successful commercial spaces in the buildings. But it is a topic that we have on the kind of future study list to see what really works in other cities that have a vacancy ordinance. How do they operate? Another thing that our public art coordinator really loves that Seattle has is an art installation program. And so that's something that some cities also take on, is how to activate those spaces through art. And if they can take over the burden of managing that space, whether it's through a nonprofit or directly through a city or other public entity, is that an appealing option for those developers? I will say that the cost of the space is real. It is extremely expensive to build the space. And so there's a reason the pro forma has that number. It's so that they don't lose money, right? And so a project that loses money right on the on the Excel spreadsheet that they show the lenders isn't going to get money lent to it, right? And so they tend to hold out. And the leases are typically so long in duration that they're willing to wait and have zero income rather than income that's less than the cost, right? So they'd rather not spend any money or take money in than, have it be losing money, right, over a period of time. So that's another one of those challenging issues. And can we get at it by just charging more fines or fees? I don't know. I mean, we are in a housing crisis, so slapping additional fees or fines or taxes on things isn't gonna really speed things up, right, in a time when we're not producing enough to keep pace with the growth. So but I do think there are some vacancy ordinances that other communities have in place that it require at least kind of a registry. The other thing, and I'm not talking about something Bristol doesn't already know about. We have talked about this, but since Deputy Mayor Mork mentioned it in terms of other tools, there are some fantastic tools out there now. There's amazing technology. Do we all have a cell phone with us today? So that data about who you are and the income level you're in and your tastes and interests, it's kind of shocking and scary how much data there is. And cities like Shoreline can use that data and use these tools to really help locate the right business in the right place and kind of hopefully speed up that process. Our Shoreline Chamber of Commerce is extremely interested in that tool. They would like to potentially partner with us so they could make use of it in some way as well. So I think there's a lot of different ways we could maybe do something about those vacancies and be prepared to, and we're exploring some of those things at this time. Great question. The Belltown vacant commercial spaces are well known. The developers like to remind us of that all the time. I don't know how much time we have left. Are we going to talk about anything other than development?
You know, that could be it. We've got about 15 minutes and there's been really rich conversation about this, so.
Maybe we will save the small business for next time. I would just say that there's a whole lot more to economic development than just real estate development. And we really learned that in the pandemic and recognized that if we wanted our small businesses to be here after the pandemic, we needed to really lean in and help them out. And so we did a number of things, but I think probably the most impactful was beginning an ongoing outreach program that has yielded a lot of insights, and just helped us to connect to our small businesses in ways that just we never have before. And small business is the backbone of the economy. We all know that. And so it's no wonder that that a big part of economic development is working with our small businesses. So we can talk about that more next time.
Yeah, maybe or a small children's clothing shop be able to afford those to rent a commercial space. Fishery State Line.
It depends.
I'd say keep going on this.
Can a small business, like a mom and pop shop or an independent grocer or a small store, afford the rent of commercial space in Shoreline? If it is one of these newly constructed buildings, probably not. Maybe not right off the bat, but there are also a lot of things we can do to help them get their business to a level where they can be successful. And one of the things we're doing this month is a small business resource fair kind of seminar where we're bringing all the different, so there's 400 different organizations or programs in Washington State that are free for small businesses that do small business support. And we're bringing a few of the key people that can help businesses be prepared for this or get their business into a position to be able to move into these kinds of spaces. And it sometimes takes some changes to the way that they do business, you know, there's some different resources out there to help businesses get to that point. But generally speaking, the brand new construction commercial space is potentially twice the price of a vacant building. But we still do have these older vacant buildings and we can do something about those vacancies. The other thing that I didn't mention is these older buildings that have vacancies, in some cases, our own code is what's prohibiting them from becoming activated again. So we've done some things to make changes to make it possible for older buildings to come back into use just as they are, recognizing that if somebody were to tear down the building and build it all shiny and new, exactly the way that the code says, it's probably going to be townhomes or, you know, something different than just, they're not going to pick up the building and move it over to make more parking or to buffer the parking the way it's supposed to be. So we've done some things to make it possible for those buildings to come back into use, because those older buildings are very attractive to independent, one-off, you know, unique businesses. And the unique types of businesses are what we hear from people that they want. It's not the national chains that they're getting that they're excited about. It's wanting more of those unique experiences and local businesses. And Deputy Mayor spoke to the example of one of those. And so there are opportunities for us to make the existing building stock work. The other thing is houses. Houses that are in areas that are zoned for commercial use are a great candidate for a lot of different kinds of small businesses, but there are some barriers in place to realizing that are, again, totally within our control as a city. And every time we kind of open up the code book and do those changes, it's a lot of work. But it could be really meaningful for that small business to be able to buy a house and use it as a business space. And we've seen some interest and we are working on that as well. And then I think as these new spaces open up and some of our existing businesses can maybe scale up and take advantage of a better location or a newer location or a bigger location, that frees up some of that older inventory to these other small businesses to move in to a space that's a warm, you know, warm shell is the phrase in the industry, that a space that's almost ready to go. So hopefully we'll see some of that as well. How did I do, boss?
I just want to mention that Nate will be doing CityLearn sometime in the fall with some of the other folks working with small businesses that will be really focused on small business development and support. So watch for that. I think it'll probably be November, October, November sometime.
Yeah, we'll get to slides 50 through 97 that in November. Part 2, stay tuned. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here and online.
Thank you. Okay. Next month, we do have another CityLearn. It'll be the first Wednesday. I think it's the 5th of the month of June. And Dr. Susana Reyes from the Seattle School District will be here to do Shoreline School District. Yes, I keep doing this today. I don't know anything like that. No. She'll be here to do an update. So I hope that you can tune into that either in person or online. Thank you all for being here.